One Navy SEAL thought he was about to embarrass a quiet woman sitting alone in a bar, but seconds later the entire room would watch his drink slip from his hand as he snapped into a salute after hearing two words that weren't supposed to belong to anyone still alive. Reaper 6. The night began like any other at the Rusted Anchor, a crowded military bar just outside the naval base in Port Hensley, Virginia, where the walls were lined with old unit flags, faded photos from deployments, and the low hum of classic rock blended with laughter from off-duty service members blowing off steam after long weeks of training. Around 9 p.m., a woman sat quietly at the far end of the bar, her gray hoodie pulled halfway over a hospital badge that read Dr. Hannah Cole, Trauma Unit, and she looked exactly like what she claimed to be, a tired emergency room doctor finishing a long shift, her dark hair tied loosely in a bun, faint shadows under her eyes, and a glass of water resting beside her phone while most of the crowd around her ordered whiskey or beer. Nobody paid much attention to her until Chief Petty Officer Ryan Maddox and 4 of his Navy SEAL teammates walked in, loud, confident, and fresh from a training rotation that had left them feeling invincible. Maddox was the type people noticed the second he entered a room. Broad shoulders, thick forearms, shaved head, and the relaxed arrogance of a man who had spent most of his adult life proving he was stronger and tougher than everyone around him. His teammates spread out along the bar, ordering drinks, joking loudly, their laughter bouncing off the wooden walls while a few civilians glanced over nervously, recognizing the unmistakable energy that came when a group of elite operators started drinking together. At first, Maddox didn't even notice Hannah sitting there, quietly scrolling through something on her phone, but when he turned to grab his beer, his elbow bumped the glass and the golden liquid splashed across the sleeve of her hoodie, soaking the fabric instantly. The splash drew the attention of half the bar, and Maddox looked down at the stain with a smirk that suggested he found the whole thing amusing. "Oops," he said casually, not sounding sorry at all. "Didn't see you there." His teammates laughed behind him, one of them slapping the counter while another raised his drink like it was part of the show. Hannah slowly looked down at the beers soaking into her sleeve, then calmly reached for a stack of napkins and began blotting the fabric as if she were cleaning a minor medical spill rather than being humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. Her movements were slow and methodical, the kind of quiet patience you saw in doctors who spent every day dealing with trauma victims and chaos, and that lack of reaction seemed to amuse Maddox even more. He leaned a little closer, the smell of whiskey heavy on his breath, and rested one elbow on the bar. "You lost, sweetheart," he said loudly enough for people nearby to hear. "This place is for warriors." The laughter from his team grew louder, and several people around the bar began pulling out their phones, sensing the kind of confrontation that often ended with someone getting thrown out or worse. Hannah didn't respond right away. She simply finished wiping the sleeve, set the napkins down, and turned slightly on her stool so she could look at him directly. Up close, her eyes were a sharp gray-green that didn't quite match the tired doctor persona she carried, and for a brief moment Maddox hesitated, though he didn't know why. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, almost bored, the way someone might speak after finishing a 12-hour shift in an emergency room where real problems existed. Maddox grinned wider. "Hey, I'm talking to you." He reached out and grabbed her wrist, intending to spin her toward him so she couldn't ignore him anymore. What happened next occurred so quickly that most of the people filming it would later replay the footage frame by frame. Try to understand how it happened. One moment Maddox's hand was wrapped around her wrist. The next moment the massive SEAL was slammed forward against the bar with his arm twisted behind his back in a perfect restraint hold that locked his shoulder and forced him onto his toes. The entire move took less than 2 seconds. Glasses rattled on the counter as Maddox's body hit the wood, his beer sloshing across the surface while the laughter in the room died instantly. Hannah hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't even fully stood up. Yet somehow she held a man, nearly twice her size, completely immobilized, her grip positioned at exactly the right angle to prevent him from using his strength. A retired operator named Chief Mark Halstead sat in a booth across the room, nursing a whiskey, and when he saw the hold, his expression changed immediately. Halstead had spent 22 years in special operations, and there were certain movements you never forgot. The subtle shift of weight, the precise joint control, The effortless efficiency of someone who had repeated the same technique thousands of times in environments where mistakes meant death. That wasn't a civilian self-defense move. That was muscle memory forged somewhere much darker. "Let him go," snapped Commander Lauren Briggs, the officer traveling with Maddox's team, her voice sharp with authority as she stepped forward. For a moment Hannah said nothing. Then she released the hold as casually as if she had simply adjusted her posture, allowing Maddox to stumble upright while she sat back down on her stool and picked up her water again. The silence in the bar was thick enough to feel. Maddox rubbed his wrist, embarrassment flashing across his face as he realized half the room had just watched him get taken down in seconds by a woman who looked like she'd just come from a hospital shift. "Lucky move," he muttered, though the confidence in his voice had weakened. Across the room, Halstead slowly set his whiskey glass on the table, his eyes never leaving Hannah as she calmly took a sip of water and scanned the room in a way that most people would miss. The quick glance at the exits, the assessment of who might intervene, the subtle shift of her feet beneath the stool to maintain balance. Those weren't habits civilians developed. Those were the instincts of someone who had spent years surviving in dangerous places. Halstead felt a chill crawl up his spine as a memory from a classified briefing years earlier flickered through his mind. A name connected to a mission that had ended in disaster and a call sign that had never been officially explained. He didn't say anything yet, but as he watched the quiet woman at the bar, one thought echoed in his mind with growing certainty. If his suspicion was right, the Navy SEAL who had just tried to humiliate her had no idea the kind of legend he had just put his hands on. And before the night was over, the entire bar was about to find out. The rusted anchor had gone strangely quiet after the brief scuffle that left Chief Petty Officer Ryan Maddox rubbing his shoulder and staring at the woman who had just taken him down without even standing up from her bar stool. The crowd had expected a shouting match, maybe security stepping in, but instead they watched a calm woman in tired scrubs sip water like nothing unusual had happened. Maddox forced a laugh, trying to reclaim his pride in front of his teammates. "You got lucky," he muttered, flexing his arm. Commander Lauren Briggs stood beside him with the stern composure of an officer used to authority. "You shouldn't be putting your hands on Navy personnel," she told the woman sharply. The woman glanced up from her glass, her hospital badge reading Dr. Hannah Cole, and answered simply, "He grabbed me first. I asked him to stop." The quiet certainty in her voice made a few people at nearby tables shift uncomfortably. Maddox rolled his eyes and planted his elbow on the bar. "Tell you what," he said loudly, tapping the counter. "Arm wrestle. Winner gets bragging rights." A few of the SEALs behind him cheered, eager to see their teammate redeem himself. Maddox had crushed plenty of opponents that way during deployments and downtime at base. Hannah barely looked at his arm. "No," she said calmly. Briggs smirked. Scared, Hannah finally turned her head toward her. Instead of answering, she asked a question that made the nearby conversations stop mid-sentence. "Third phase dive training," Hannah said. "Week 5. Your partner blacks out during underwater not drills. What's the recovery procedure?" Briggs blinked in confusion. That wasn't general military trivia. It was a very specific training scenario. Jake, the bartender, a former Marine who rarely missed details, raised an eyebrow. "Interesting question, Doc," he said slowly. He reached under the bar and pulled out a training pistol he kept for safety demonstrations, cleared it, and slid it across the counter. "Field strip it." A small crowd leaned closer. Hannah studied the pistol for a moment before lifting it with one hand. Her fingers moved quickly and smoothly. Flat off. Spring out. Barrel separated. The pieces landed neatly on the bar in a straight line. The whole thing took only seconds. Jake stared at the parts, impressed despite himself. "That was fast," he murmured. The SEALs exchanged uncertain glances now. The moment grew even stranger when a big private contractor named Viktor Petrov, who had been drinking near the dartboards, stumbled forward with a mocking laugh. "In my country," he slurred, "people who pretend to be soldiers get punished." He reached for Hannah's shoulder. The movement lasted less than a second. Hannah shifted slightly on the stool, redirected his arm, and drove a precise elbow into his chest. Victor collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The room recoiled. Hannah calmly lifted her water again. "Please stop touching me," she said. The front door suddenly swung open and Rear Admiral Thomas Granger stepped inside with 2 aides. The room stiffened immediately. Granger scanned the bar, noticing the fallen contractor, the stun seal team, and finally Hannah. His expression changed in a way only a few people noticed. Maddox, still determined not to lose face, gestured toward her again. "You talk like an operator," he said. "Operators have call signs." The bar had gone completely silent now. Maddox folded his arms. "So what's yours?" Hannah slowly set her glass on the counter and stood. Outside, dark SUVs rolled into the parking lot. Retired Chief Mark Halstead, sitting in a corner booth, checked a message on his phone and suddenly looked alarmed. "Lieutenant," he began, trying to warn Maddox, but the younger SEAL was too focused on Hannah. She looked straight at him and spoke quietly. "Reaper 6. For a moment nobody moved. Then Maddox's drink slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor as his body instinctively snapped into a rigid salute. The sound of the shattered glass seemed to echo through the rusted anchor as everyone stared at Hannah. Maddox's salute had come out of pure instinct, the kind drilled into operators when a name carried a reputation far above rank. For a few long seconds no one spoke. Commander Lauren Briggs slowly turned toward Rear Admiral Thomas Granger, who had stepped further into the bar with a tight expression. "Sir," she began quietly. Granger didn't answer her right away. His eyes stayed on Hannah. Then he gave a small nod of recognition that made several veterans in the room straighten immediately. "At ease, Lieutenant," the Admiral finally said to Maddox. The young SEAL lowered his hand slowly, embarrassment creeping across his face as he realized he had challenged someone far outside his weight class. Hannah sighed softly, as if the whole scene had become more trouble than it was worth. "I really just wanted a quiet drink," she said. Jake the bartender shook his head in disbelief. "Ma'am, are you really retired?" Hannah interrupted gently. "Mostly." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, though the tension was still thick. The Admiral walked closer and lowered his voice. "We've been looking for you," he said. Hannah rubbed her temple tiredly. "I figured." Outside, the SUV's engines hummed quietly, waiting. Maddox cleared his throat and stepped forward, suddenly respectful. "Ma'am, I didn't know." Hannah gave him a small smile. "You weren't supposed to." She picked up her jacket from the stool and headed toward the door. As she passed Maddox, he stepped aside immediately. Before leaving, she paused and looked back at the stunned room. "Next time," she said calmly, "maybe don't grab strangers at bars." Then she walked out into the night with the Admiral following, leaving the rusted anchor buzzing with shocked whispers. Maddox stared at the door for a long moment before muttering to his teammates, half amazed and half embarrassed, "We just tried to arm wrestle Reaper 6. And for years afterward, the people who had been there that night would swear they saw a legend quietly finish a glass of water before disappearing back into the shadows.